This is Tristan McGough, your philosopher at large. Today, this is the 10th in our series on a seminar on self. We're going to be dealing with the choice of self-transformation. Or as a subtitle, what I like to say, controlling choice for consciously changing reality. Now, the last session, you might recall, we reviewed the nature of reality as being fundamentally that of change, and there were elements that were changeless, and there were elements that were changing, and there was a changer, that is, conscious being, which was the fulcrum, as you will, of carving the finite world out of the pure being of the absolute reality and creating what we have come to term finite reality, the world of finitude, of particulars. Now, just by way of a visual summary, you might recall that we were dealing with the nature of change. However, here I have choice in the changing reality. And if we look at the idea of reality as change, this is the center of convergence for what we know of as pure being and the finite being, conscious being, and non-being. Now, in terms of choice, which is nothing more than conscious change, we have comparable terms in terms of the infinite universals of pure being, where we have the unchanging in a changing world, that is, the infinite universals such as redness or roundness or humanness. These things never change. They are what they are. They're infinite. That is, you can utilize the universals or instantiate them. As Plato said, they participate in the finite world. The participator, the one who performs these functions, is the same one that is the apperceiver of these functions, and that is the conscious being. And this is the changer. In terms of a conscious choice, we have to ask ourselves, just as we did with the nature of change, what's the nature of choice? Now, the nature of choice, one would automatically assume, is going to involve the will, which indeed it does. Because as you recall, there are four main faculties to the self, right? There's willing, thinking, feeling, and doing, which you can summarize by the terms of will, mind, heart, or love, and life. These are all four facets of the self, and they all cooperate at the same time. They're co-founded in the sense that you can't have one without the other. They're married to the very concept, reality, and nature of the self. In terms of just briefly going over what it is so far that we have covered up to this point, I've provided, before we discuss the nature of choice, a summarization of the faculties and the contents of experience. So, of these six, I'd like you first of all to focus simply here on experience, and that every time we have an experience, there's an experiencer, there's the experiencing itself, which is the knowing, and there's the experience. Now, you can call experience knowledge if you like, but if you do knowledge or experience, remember, it's the tri-founded relation of the knower, knowing, and known. For instance, At this very moment, what you are perceiving is the experience, from what you're hearing and seeing, is the experience. It's the objective world, so to speak. That is, it's an object that is presented to your consciousness in the intentional structure that I've termed the epistic relation of subject and object that creates something altogether new. For instance, as we're discussing now, what you are visually and auditorily experiencing at your end and that I'm producing is the experience. And each of us are experiencing this as a unique experiencer. However, as we've discussed, the experiencer itself is grounded in unitive reality or unitive being. This consciousness that is attained through self-transformation is, in a large sense, of unity with what already is united. It's a question of becoming more conscious of that. Because reality is going to change whether you participate or not, consciously. And most of our participation in reality is, in reality, not really free choice whatsoever. The Hindus have a concept called samskaras, and these are the residual impressions from your experience that form themselves into the constraints by which your future experience is going to be encountered. They form, as it were, the kind of lattice and structure through which you're going to experience the world. And not only that, but they are propensities so that you are not simply going to have an experience, you're going to have a propensity to have a certain kind of experience. And that's what I've outlined here. In terms of the process of self-transformation, you have all these contents that are going on in terms of your own individual self. Now remember, I outlined that there were 10. There were 10 facets of self, if you will, 10 dimensions of self: the bodily, perspectable, emotional, narrating, volitional, social, the continuing self, as well as the unifying self, the advancing self, and the unifying or identifying self, the final self. The unifying self is that which organizes each of your experiences. The advancing self is what is organizing them to experience what we term as the future, which is nothing more than the unfoldment, that is the efflorescence of what is immanent from that which is transcendent. We're turning the potential into actual through our instrumentality. And our instrumentality is exactly the point where the rubber meets the road. It's the point where conscious being meets pure being and carves out of that, right, by the implicit choicelessness of shunyata, or emptiness, or void, and creates finite being. As we were speaking about moments ago, let's put this back just for a moment. We're talking about change as being really the recipe of reality. Change is where there's the changeless, that is non-being. Non-being, not being anything whatsoever, is absolutely the limit of changelessness. And that differs from the unchanging pure being of the infinite universals that are inexhaustible. And every time that they're applied, I mean red is red. No matter how it is explained or described in the physical world in the interaction of photonic reflection off objects and its registration on the retina and its eventual interpretation through the optic nerve going to the brain. And all of these things are happening simultaneously in the physical world with things that are occurring affectively at a much subtler level, material, but still at a subtle material level. And it's the same thing with what we call our intellect. Whether it's our physical body, our vital body, our emotional body, or our mental body, these are all states of matter. These are all finer degrees of being that are carved up by the individuals that inhabit these worlds and define them through their epistemic relation. And that all happens with all the individuals all at once in what I call is syncosm. Syncosm is where everything in the cosmos is occurring in the same instantaneous moment. Nothing's left out, including nothing. When we're speaking about the cosmos, we're talking about the one and only, all and everything of being, non-being, finite being, and conscious being, and anything which is something. And that very all-encompassing conception of the universe allows us to understand that these ingredients are modifiable. So when we're speaking about change and taking hold of change consciously, and then creating something entirely new, or at least partly new, because from moment to moment, if you're making a conscious change, you are helping to intentionally alter the environment. Now that environment may be the internal environment that I call the purlieu, that is this interior psyche in which there is always the subject-object relation in terms of what it produces. It produces transfinite interjects, which simply means that you bring a subject, such as my consciousness, together with an object, such as this pointer, this silver pointer, so that I behold it. There is something new that happens. It's not just the pointer. It's not just my consciousness, which is now floating freely. It is that I fix through attention, or intensity of consciousness, through my senses, onto something that becomes an object when I behold it, because I am its subject. What I create, that is, my perception of this silver pen, is an interject. It doesn't exist as the pen. It doesn't exist as my mere consciousness. It exists as the result of the contact and the connectivity of this thing with this conscious thing, creating something that is not itself conscious, but is a content of consciousness. Whether you are having willings, or thinkings, or feelings, or doings, they are all part of your experience and part of the contents of your consciousness. In the same way that all your senses, that is, of course, your 5 passive senses and your 5 active senses. Remember, I think I listed those very quickly here. The 5 passive senses of hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling, and the 5 active senses of speech and manipulation, locomotion, and then the other 2 of procreation and elimination. Of course, we can discuss whether there are others, but the idea is that there are active senses that are receiving information from the environment and actually reinterpreting it, reforming it into its own reformulated, and if it's conscious, then reflective objects of experience, which are the contents, the interjects. These things, let's take for instance with thought. That is the mind. And here we have intelligence. Remember, I broke intelligence up, and I've color-coded these things, of course, so that everywhere blue. In terms of the self, you're going to see intelligence here under this, which basically, in terms of a mode of consciousness, is thinking. In terms of functions of consciousness, it's understanding and reason, which is really discernment and judgment, right? It's the things that you discern and that stay there. That's your understanding. And that's the basis, the forms by which you are going to experience the world. As we were talking about in terms of the transformations of ethos last time, we were talking about the character and the personality, and how the character are the capacities and forms. These are motivational dispositions that are at a very deep level of your psyche. They are basically implicit. You have an implicit discernment of the world. And that's the form, if you will, where you're going to pour the water of your experience, and the contents are going to form according to the shape of that container. So it's important that your understanding, that which stands under, that's part of your logos, that's part of the mind, that part of what stands under is based on reality, that it corresponds to reality. So through the principle of correspondence, what we do is we find that we move ourselves from the entrainment, such as your conscious mind operating right at this moment. And if your conscious mind devolves, for instance, into simply daydreaming, it's enchantment. If, however, it becomes conscious of itself at any moment and reflects that light in the expressions that it chooses so that it's beneficial and impactful and valuable for others in the environment, as part of the cosmos, as well as yourself, that's what we call enlightenment, with its companion fruits that we were speaking of right from the beginning, right? The fruits of self-transformation. And there's enlightenment for the mind, there's endearment for the heart. You see, I touch this as many of us do when it comes to our feeling aspect, because it is the center of our organismic experience. We feel the heartbeat at a subliminal level all the time. We are aware of a lot of things that are not on the surface of our consciousness as we surf the ocean of finite being as a limited epistic self, the self that's involved not only in the three-dimensional world, but in the higher dimensions of affections and feelings and desires and dreams and hopes and all those emotional elements that are of a finer grade of matter, but yet interact so that even on this physical plane, I am not a stone, I am flesh that feels. And at a higher level than that, feelings are organized into mental constructs, thoughts, notions, opinions, beliefs, all these things that are cognitively present as mental appearances, as objects that we are able to mentally behold, just as there are felt objects, right? These objects of the mind that we're talking about. I think I have a representation of that here in terms of the contents of consciousness again. And we're talking about, with just thought itself, that you have a fundamental view, there are notions, there are presumptions, and there are actual thoughts that do take place. And in regards just to that, and we're dealing here just with the element of mind itself, you'll see that here, under temperament, you have your view. And this is part of the character. You remember that the character and the personality are two facets of the will. The will is, if you will, the virtue of heroism. That is, it's the power of applied energy in the physical, the emotional, the mental worlds. It is where we change our thoughts, we change our feelings, we change the way that we behave. This behavior, composed of your willful intents, these are the things that are actually being expressed. Right now, I'm expressing certain deeds, right? I have accompanying emotions and thoughts and intents. I intend to impart some information. I'm trying to have as clear as thoughts as possible, so I'm being very attentive. You'll see that I'm not bound by doxa, which are these constraints upon the way that you feel and think and act, right, and will. The doxa are your uninformed constraints. They're the limitations. They're the poisons. I've referred to them before as self-cis formations. That is, they're the things that drag you down. And here, besides the enchantment in the mind, if instead of being entertained in the moment, that is, being actively engaged and joyfully engaged with your interlocutor, your lover, your environment, a flower, your pet, if you're not actually being entertained, then you're probably in a state either of boredom or disattention, and you're estranged instead of connected to those that you could deeply love. And if you more deeply love them, then they become endearing to you. You've endeared them to your heart. You've brought them into your being by, instead of just being an erotic being, an erotic being, a being that's looking out for their own self-centered desires and being fulfilled, you're actually participating in that other polar element that we spoke of with pathos, and that is agape, a sense of universal love. It's where you can empathize with others. And not just humans, but you will empathize even at very deep levels, because they are expansive levels of emotion that you share with animals that are sentient beings. In terms of how to take control of the world of change, you're basically going to be applying fundamental principles that were discovered millennia ago by rishis, or those who have revelatory insight through unitive consciousness. They understand the nature of reality in its fourfold aspect of pure being, finite being, conscious being, and non-being, the void. And they've left behind, if you will, in the traces of the past, aphorisms or sutras that are designed to lead one along the path of self-transformation. Probably the most well-known of these from the East is Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Patanjali lived in approximately 200 AD, Common Era, and he was the father, if you will, of the Yoga Sutras, being one who was trained and taught and eventually systematized these into 4 books, or padas. And the first is the Samadhi Pada, and it deals with what is that state of unitive consciousness. And out of the gate, the second verse, he defines yoga for us. And he says, yoga is the control of the mind and its modifications. Control of the mind and its modifications. Well, what controls the mind? The self. As it controls the will and the heart and the life. Altogether, they are facets of the self. So the 10 dimensions of self that you take yourself upon on the journey of self-transformation are the very things, the instruments that you are going to use in order to build the contents of your experience into a unity. It's very interesting that commentators on Patanjali see that yoga, which means to yoke or to return to union, is essentially union. So it is not just yoga is the control of the mind and its modifications. It's union is the control of mind and its modifications. In other words, attaining to the state of union is what samadhi is. And that is what yoga is, as being the binding back of the individual with the universal. So that what occurs in the individual is the universe becoming aware of itself. If you want to know what spirit is, don't look for spirit as some other kind of rarefied substance. Look at spirit as what is in you as consciousness at this very moment. That is spirit. Being conscious of being conscious is the universe awakening to itself. It doesn't do it through a pen or a pointer or a board or a sheet of paper or, for that matter, anything short of a self-conscious being. Now, what's self-conscious? Because upon that hinges the potency for conscious change. If you're not self-conscious, you're just part of the change process, right? The materials will be reshaped into this pot or into this vase or into this plate or whatever it is. However, when it comes to conscious choices in life, you have to break free of the things that constrain you if you are going to transform what is a potential into an actuality. Otherwise, all you're doing is you're repeating the past forms again and again and again, and people call that boredom, habituation, non-learning, non-growth. Growth is important to awakening. We said that there is not only growing up, where you go through the developmental stages as a personality from infant all the way through adult, you not only grow up, but there's waking up, where you become conscious of your consciousness that has permeated that entire sequence of growing up. And that, if you will, is at its crown and now can continue its evolution consciously. What we don't often understand is that we're not only meeting needs in life, we're not only having to fulfill what Abraham Maslow talked about as our maintenance of basic needs, and then the second level, safety needs, and the third, social needs, which is belongingness, and then we have our dignity needs, which is not only our self-esteem, but we want the respect of others, the esteem of others. And once we get to that point where we are able to maintain our nutrient sufficiency, our biological adequacy, our ecological harmony, not only with society, but with larger nature, and the maintenance of social integrity, that is the ability of sentient beings, whether they're your pets or plants or the garden or the larger park in this community center. It doesn't matter what it is. These are all part of social integrity, of having things hang together so that you can interact as a sentient being with other sentient beings. A good portion of that in life, particularly for human beings, is the interaction with other human beings. But we shouldn't think of ourselves as just a society of humans. We should think of ourselves as a society of living beings. Once you've gotten to the point where these things are maintained, then you can continue your personal maturity, and that's called waking up. That's when you begin the process as a conscious being to be self-conscious, and you can fully say, I am conscious of being conscious. And that transparency of consciousness is the key that you turn to access yourself directly. That's the turning inward. And that's an important thing to do. It is important every day to meditate, to give yourself the time where you close down the finite world and open yourself up to the world of conscious being and pure being, and even to the void, and to the finite contents of your consciousness that transform in your internal purlieu, this environment that you inhabit uniquely, and that you transform before any transformation takes place out here in the world of behavior. You're going to transform your attitude, your perspective, and your temperament first. We had a whole session where we spoke in terms of perspective and how, in the frozen aspects, the doxa, before the darsha, that is before the lead us from darkness to light. So it says in the Upanishads. Lead us from darkness to light, right? Lead us from a point where we are constrained by our beliefs and sentiments and habits and commitments. These are closed. They close our attitude so that when we respond, we have rather fixed responses. So if I believe in a certain premise, such as you can choose anything. It can be spiritual, religious, political. It can even be factual. The thing is, whatever your belief is, you're probably going to express as a thought. Now, you can either do that in a fixed way, and you're rather distracted, and somebody asks you something, you say, well, it's just this. And you're not really attentive to what they're saying, and you're giving the conditioned response, but that's already a supposition that exists here as a presupposition, as a belief, and largely we don't check our beliefs. Not any more than we check our views. We think, see, the views are the basic formative logos here, along with mood, drive, and aim, that allows the foundation of character, if you will, this formative aspect, that is basically the implicit understanding that is occurring at a high level of your psyche that you're probably never even aware of. You don't even know if you are viewing the world primarily as chaos or as cosmos. Do you have a mood which is optimistic or pessimistic? Is your drive weak or is it strong? When it comes to your aim, do you have a sense of purposefulness in the world or not? Aimlessness. These are all things which are contracted temperaments. You can't have a temperament that is going to engage the world fully and look to move from the constraints to confluence, where you are going to synergetically interact in such a fashion with the world that not only are you going to be improved, but you will improve the lives of those around you. That's the process of moving from doxa, from all these constraints, to darsha. And if you look just in terms of attitude, if you have a closed commitments, beliefs, sentiments, and habits, rather than open, you are going to behave in the world quite different from a person who has different attitude. If they have an attitude, for instance, instead of beliefs, such as, I believe all men are created equal. If that's just about all people are created equal, if that's just a belief, man incidentally is from the Sanskrit man, which means to think, and mens in Latin, again meaning to think. The term manus, the term man, mind, was all meant to refer to that rational, reflective aspect. It had nothing whatsoever to do with gender when this was being referred to as human, as the mind of light. Man, in this case, meant mind. It had nothing to do whatsoever with biology as we understand it. But that's the nature of etymology. That happens with a good deal, and that's why I am very particular about the terms that I use, because they're born in the garden of culture, and the roots, the etymologies of words, are what lies in the soil of our culture. If you want to understand our culture and its concepts, follow down to the roots of any plant of conception, and you'll study the etymology and see some just absolutely fascinating ways that language has samskaras, as these fixed modifications, right? That's what language is. It's a system of symbolic patterns that are used for intelligible communication. And any system of symbols that you're going to use is going to involve finite particulars of which you are going to assign a meaning, as I'm doing here. So when I say blue or red, blue represents mind, and red represents life, and yellow represents the moods and the affects, the heart, and green is representative of will. These are all conventional designations. I could have chosen any colors, but I chose these for a very strong reason. And the reason has to do with lineages and graphic intelligence. Lineages in terms of what traditions am I following in terms of the chromatology or the color assignments to various functions of the human mind, and that is strongly Buddhist in terms of relating to the Dhyani Buddhists. However, that being the case, what I also do is in terms of graphic intelligence have themed it in such a way so that as you look at anything that I've presented here, you can pretty well tell what basket it belongs into, whether it belongs to mind, right? Logos, theoria, sophos, all based on cognosis, which fundamentally, as we've talked about before, is consciousness as that it's the cognitive facet of consciousness, just like the heart is the affective facet of consciousness, and the will is the volitional aspect of consciousness, and life is the dynamic, vital aspect of consciousness. These four are interdependent, just like the recipe of reality. So when we are looking to go and control what good yogis or transformers or psychonauts do, when we want to control our choices, we have to understand that firstly what we've got to do is get down to the point where we are not constrained, contracted, fixed, and frozen in our temperament, perspective, attitude, and behavior. These have to be loosened up and expanded, and the steps, that is, these self-transformative evolutionary techniques that or practices that we've been employing week after week, open you up a little bit more to the less contracted and the more expansive aspects of yourself. Because these expansive aspects of yourself are not just merely your potentials, they are actually your future. So now, referring to the hierarchy of needs and humans, we got to the point we were talking about the continuance of personal maturity through growing up to waking up. Once you move beyond that, there are other levels that you as a human being naturally have. They're not something that needs to be given to you. They're not something that needs to be supplied. Awakening is the process by which you move into the higher levels of your performative powers, which exist now as potencies and latencies, but become patencies, these objective expressions of what you've chosen in your life that is transformative in the sense that it brings about greater beneficence for you and for others. You'll notice that just in your behavior, when it's fluid, your intents are benefic rather than malefic. You're looking in a fluid way to meet the challenges of your environment. There is something called in ecological theory the principle of requisite variety, which means that organisms survive that have the requisite or needed amount of variable responses to the challenges in their environment so that they can successfully, not just adequately, they can successfully meet that challenge. That's the essence of intelligence. It's able to meet a problem, find a solution, and you find that solution because of previous experience that not only has been stored, but has been well stored and is accessible. And this is what we're talking about in terms of this higher level of character. These are implicit levels of understanding and reason. You can look at understanding as the composite of discernment. That's all the discernments you've ever had integrated together so that you look upon the world with a certain understanding. Your reason, if you will, is the active element of the logos, just like your understanding is the coherent and maximized part of your logos. Your reason is a method, it is a means, it is a moment, it is a state of consciousness by which what you are taking is the world and you are rationalizing it. You are taking one thing and comparing it to the other, whether it's verbally or whether it's visually in terms of contrast of a moving body against a stationary board. There are all these judgments that are being made by reason at any given time in a fixed state of consciousness I call cognizance. And where cognition is the flow of consciousness, seamless, continuous, unbroken, non-discontinuous flow, a cognizance is a moment like a snapshot where you say, this is this. All it is a fleeting moment. I mean, when you're talking about the incredible rapidity by which things happen in this world. I mean, you take a single leaf of grass, and scientists tell us that there are 10 quadrillion photons that are striking that blade of grass every second. How do you comprehend that? 10 quadrillion photons? In other words, there's a good chance that that chlorophyll is going to be activated by the energy from the source of the sun through photons. It happens so rapidly, it happens so quickly in our time frame that it is not a cognizance for us any more than I am making cognizant my flowing blood and the speed at which it's coursing through my body. I have no cognizance of this whatsoever. But yet at a very deep level, I'm certainly aware of it. Difference. You have, at any given moment, besides your liminal cognizantal awareness of what's going on in reality, which is your basis of choice, you say, I'm going to choose, right? You're choosing in the moment. But that choice is based upon the things that have changed before and then been solidified in your personality and your character as these various frozen doxa, these things that are going to limit the way that you interact, for instance, as an intentional being. There are certain things you'll never allow yourself to do because of commitments that you've made. However, as you've lived life, those commitments have turned into fortitudes. If you've had a commitment, for instance, of fidelity in marriage, that commitment, which at one time was an intention of the will that you had to enforce perhaps, or that you did gladly and joyfully, becomes a fortitude upon which you can rely at any given time. You don't have to keep going back to a commitment and repeating that to yourself intentionally. I have to keep this vow. I have to keep this vow. That vow has become part of the sinew of your character. And so, being that, you can rely on it as part of your attitude that you take toward the world, and it's a fortitude. In the same way that your beliefs eventually become altitudes. Your belief, no matter what it is going to allow you to climb a cognitive ladder so high, and you can look out over your horizon and interpret it from that altitude, rather than saying, "Well, I believe in this," and you're at this fixed rung of the ladder. And I don't care what it is. It can be a religious belief, a political belief, an economic belief, a belief in yourself about your own psychology. But if you're going to just hold on to that rung of the ladder, and that's your belief, you're never moving up. And if you want to move up, and you want a higher altitude, choose a belief that's more inclusive. What you are really doing in choosing self-transformation is you're choosing to include more of the world in your life. And that happens by you opening up your inner life first, and that's why we're talking about the next stage is the fluorescence or the unfolding of your interactive authenticity. You are going to live a truthful life. You discover the truth, and there's a beauty in truth, and it doesn't matter whether it's the truth coming from the Vedas or the Bible, or the truth coming from a scientific textbook, or the truth coming from astrophysics, or mathematical truth. You are going to find that by corresponding your mind with what is actually occurring in the nature of reality, right, in terms of its recipe, what is it? That's just a recipe. The recipe, what is baking? What is occurring right now? What's the mix? How much nothingness is there? How much pure being is there? How much finite being, and what kinds of finite being are you dealing with at any given time? And you, as the chooser, as the conscious being, are going to carve out of being finite being by the use of nothingness. You are going to eventually come to a point where you see that nothingness, non-being, it's always changeless, it's always choiceless, it's always controlless. There is no sense of control in non-being. Non-being is non-being. Nothing is, right? With non-being, you don't have anything. So there's no control. Get rid of the idea of control. Yoga is defined as the control of the mind and its modifications. But yet, you're going to find that as you move through spiritual development, you're eventually going to give up all control. because the universe has been in control. You, as part of the universe, are learning how to take control, which is more like taking orders. The universe orders things like it orders a pizza, and you're a pizza parlor, and you're going to learn how to respond with skillful means. And you're going to be a cosmic pizza parlor, in that you're going to learn how to respond to the entire panoply of existent beings in a way that would be the envy of any athlete or tennis player. You're going to be like an octopus in terms of handling your willings, your thinkings, your doings, your feelings, all together, all at once, in a unified manner, and you're going to understand that these samskaras, these karmic residues, these things that you've built up over time, your fears, your cravings, your thoughts that shape the way that you believe that certain things are in the world, all these various constraints, you eventually get to a point where you find within yourself that they are the very same essence as what expansiveness is. Everything you have that you consider as your limitation and your constraint is the very thing that you are going to use in order to expand. The very ground you fall on will be the ground you lift yourself up from. The very self that you flagellate for its temptations and its failures and its limitations and its foibles and its frails, that's going to be the very self that's going to find in those foibles, those fixations, the very same energies that went into forming them. But this time, in terms of conscious control, you become the controller. And to become the controller means that you are going to look at the choosable. The choosable is anything that's eternal. You can't choose a finite object that's already been chosen. The camera that's recording me, I can't choose. I can choose to sit in front of it. I can't choose to build it. It's been built. It's already been chosen. It's already been delivered as a finite object in this world. However, if I decided to build some kind of camera that maybe was omnidirectional, that could look in 360 degrees, instead of having a lens, its entire sphere was the lens, and it looked out every which way. Now, there's a rather interesting idea, but the idea itself is taking shape from what? It's taking shape from unchanging, infinite universals. I'm conceiving of something called vision. I'm conceiving of something called 360-degree perception in space, as if from a point you expand out in a spherical manner with a single lens, and it's all integrated all at once. That's what awareness is. That's what the sphere of consciousness is. The sphere of awareness in which all of your contents take place, and you eventually move up that axial path from being creating cis formations that keep you locked in, constrained, and fixated, repeating the same pattern time after time, to liberating patterns. Patterns that will repeat, but rather than going around in a circle, you find the pattern repeating at a higher level on a spiral of conscious evolution. And that is the spiral that leads to the very apex. And the apex that we speak of is enosis, that is this complete sense of union. Well, as you practice yoga in order to reunite, with what you're already united to, you are in a unified field already of consciousness, including your physical body and your vital body and the other bodies beyond that allow you on each level to have the experience you have. If you're talking about a mental body, your mental body is not someplace other than this physical world. At this moment, your mental body is what you're thinking through and with, as the brain itself is nothing more than the ripples on the surface of the water as your canoe of consciousness cuts through it. It's the immediate effect of your consciousness working through the mind and your various other layers of affective feelings and vital energies right to the very systems of your organic being, whether it's your respiratory and pulmonary system, whether it's your skeletal, muscular, whether it's your nervous, your central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, it doesn't matter. All of these systems themselves not only are integrated on the plane in which they operate so that they're causally effective, they're interplanarly causal effective. I can cause the way that I move my hand by something that is occurring not within the brain, but upon which the brain is based. Not before, something upon which the brain is based, and that is the mind. So when we are looking at the various aspects of reality, we have to understand that this is what change is. Change is these four ingredients to the recipe of reality of pure being, non-being, conscious being, and finite being, all being at the same time. The elements that are changing here in the finite world are what are subject to change. They express the nature of change, but more importantly, they give us the opportunity to make a choice. Because where there is change, there is a movement from potential into the actual. And that fulcrum is conscious being, who becomes not only the chooser, but the controller. Now, what's the difference? I can choose to reshuffle here in the chair. But that's based upon the previous control I already have as a healthy physical body that's well coordinated. If I didn't have that control, the choice I would make to move up would not be as smooth and efficacious as I've made it appear. And that's the case for everything that's taking place in the changeable world of reality. So where we want to make a choice, we have to first ask ourselves, what are we in control of? If you are not in control of your habits, if you are not in control of your sentiments, and of your beliefs, and of your commitments, then whatever choices you make are going to be constrained by those commitments, beliefs, sentiments, and habits. What you wish to do is to alter the basis of control gradually, and that's transformation. Remember, we spoke of micro transformations. These are moments of opportunity, literally, in the present, because the present is all we have. That's where the presencing of the ground takes place, and everything is expressed as a unity. We haven't left any subquantum particle behind in the now, have we? Not a thing. When you look at the various modifications that take place in manifestation, remember this. This manifestation, the light spectrum by which I'm interpreting manifestation is pretty narrow on the whole electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light that we can perceive with the retina. Same thing with our hearing. We hear only a certain range of sounds. There are, of course, inaudible sounds beyond the ear's detection on frequencies higher and lower. Science has indisputably proven that. And there are other species that have different ranges of sensibility by way of sight. Many insects see the ultraviolet spectrum, and they see ultraviolet patterns more so than they see colors. Or species can hear at higher decibel levels than the human ear can take. So that becomes their manifest reality, which it is not for us. The X-rays are not a manifest reality. What's manifest reality for us, visually speaking, is this narrow spectrum of visible light. So we're interpreting the entire world from the get-go from our own organismic constraints. But that is the nature of finity. You cannot interact unless you have something to interact with. And that is the nature why we are in a world that is not only of space and time, but it's also of entity and causation. Space is being occupied by entities, moving in local, consequential causality, where things that happen make a difference to other things. So, as a psychonaut who is looking to transform your consciousness into happiness, it's imperative that you understand that the choices that you're going to make now, such as what to affirm, what to practice, what to read, what to meditate on, all these things are choices that you're making now, however constrained they are by what's controlling you, as samskaras, as these tendencies from the past that are the basis upon which you're going to choose. Your choosing is going to be a micro-transformation of the very control in the future. Because what is going to be more controllable are the universals such as truth, beauty, goodness, that you are going to bring into your life in order to truly fluoresce, so that you are going to move beyond self-actualization to enlightenment, where you're going to live the honest life. You're going to live by truth. And truth is something that you open up within yourself because you have already that alethic sense that we spoke of. The alethic sense, of course, is the sense that is comparable to an aesthetic sense for the heart, and an ethical or moral sense, and I've termed that archaic as well, for the will. This is all of this is an interaction of will, love, and mind, and doings. However, when I'm talking about the senses that exist as your spiritual senses, these are what you are awakening through self-actualization. The more you become aware of truth through what corresponds in your mind to what is out in the changeable world of reality, the more that you become enraptured by that reality in its aesthetic beauty through the aesthetic sense, the more that you are going to live a happy life, and you are going to attain this ecstasy, the sense of being happily outside of yourself and engaged in the world in a united fashion that brings bliss, a pleasant feeling, clarity to the mind, and a sense of purpose to the will. And that will be the next level of accomplishment and flourishing. And these I call numens. These are needs. These are numens. What are numens? They're spiritual needs, like numinosity or numinal, referring to things that have a divine sensibility to them, or a pervasive presence of unity and bliss. These numinal things are actually needs that are developed and that are satisfied by oneself when you move from growing up through waking up into lifting up. Lifting up is when you interact with the world that's already united to you in countless ways of connection, organically, physically, sonorously, culturally, aesthetically, religiously, economically. We are so interdependent in so many vast ways that science is only beginning to explore the multifarious facets of connectivity amongst us all. And this is really what is occurring in these higher levels, and this is why I put them as blue. These green are basic to your organic and your empiric self. This is the turning point. This is you as a psyche, as a soul, as a self-conscious mind, love, will, and life. Take responsibility and actualize yourself by envisioning and achieving. It's the realizing life. It's where you realize that reality is not just what you make it. Reality is what is already there and occurring, in which you become a more conscious participant. And that is what all these fluorescences are. They're the opening up to a greater inclusiveness within the world. So rather than feeling separate as a sinful being, remember, sin is really separation from God in the Christian dogma. However, when they speak of that the truth will set you free, they're talking about finally getting your consciousness to align with the cosmos. And this is what we're talking about in living the honest life. And then through your aesthetic sense, you live the beautiful life, and through your aretaic or ethical sense, you learn how to live the good life. And ultimately, the fluorescence of spiritual unity is that you will find that you are the one life. You're part of it. But there's no less of the one life in you than there is in any other thing that has existence. Again, from Paramahansa Yogananda, said, whether I am a small or a big wave of being, the ocean of life is beneath me. So as we can sum up, if you want to transform yourself on a self-evolving and permanent basis, then it's important that the choices you make are going to be based upon the control you already have. And that control you already have is built maintained, preserved, encouraged, added to, expanded by your micro-transformations in each moment where you consciously choose to change some aspect of your reality. And remember this, the change that occurs can be looked upon in an effortless way. Things happen. Things happen in nature, some which we wouldn't like or agree with, or if we had an ideal world, we think we would change. Things happen in the world in terms of conflicts and strife, which in an ideal world, we would say we would rather not have. But how do you get to that ideal world? That ideal world is not going to happen. It's not going to change there by itself. It has to change through conscious intervention. And through conscious intervention, you are going to realize that the choices you make are dependent upon the control you have. So you need to have self-control more than anything else, which meditation, I will remind you, allows you to deepen and strengthen. Meditation is the muscle of the mind. The more you exercise it, the more strength you are going to have in your mental existence as you encounter the problems that will demand your intelligence to solve. And the best way to do that is by cultivating those aspects of character that are going to allow you to stay in control when the changing world goes mad. And when it changes beyond the recognition of what you previously believed. You still are a center of control. You are a center of command because you understand that choice is based upon the control you have. So union is the control of the mind and its modifications. The more that you unify yourself with what you are already united to, but that unification occurs consciously, the fuller you participate within life. That being said, what we are going to undertake today is step number 7, controlling choice. And so as a final exercise, let us look at the self-transformation evolving practice number 7. Now, the nature of reality is change, as we've talked about. Conscious choice is a change that has further change ramifications, and consciously controlling choice leads to intended transformative changes in you and in those whom you touch. When next confronted with a problematic situation, facing options, and considering a choice, take a few moments to meditate and mind, in the sense of extract from what you already control, the control necessary to make a beneficial choice. So, there are 4 simple steps here. You're going to first enter the door of awakening through the mantra of awakening, I am conscious of being conscious. And then ponder Patanjali's sutra, yoga, or union, is the control of the mind and its modifications. As you meditate upon that, you may think about, how does union come about? Except through uniting. How does union come about? Except through uniting. That is, how does union come about except through the practice of yoga, right? Where you're going to bind something back. That's the process of uniting. And how can uniting occur? That is, how can you practice yoga in any sense of binding back? And how can uniting occur if things are not always already unified? Right? If cause wasn't unified with effect, how could you bring about or effect any change? So the mystery of unity is actually the meditation, that is the union, with the unity that already exists, that allows you therefore to maintain that unifying consciousness where what you already control is going to be the solid basis for your choices in the future. And so the next time you consider a choice, ask, as the universe's self-conscious presence, that is you, as the universe's self-conscious presence, is this what I want to bring about into existence? Or you could say, is this what we want to bring into existence? Because remember, you are the universe. There'd be no universe apart from you. And apart from you, there is no universe. So when you talk about being the universe's self-presencing, it's the universe presencing to itself. You have to ask yourself as the universe, do I really want this to come into being? That's your choice. So until next time, when we consider the results of self-transformation, behave when you must. Be good whenever you can, but above all else, be yourself.